Hello everyone and welcome to another Cinema 4D tutorial. My name is Orestis and today's topic is a rather interesting one, how to control animation using the MoGraph toolset. So this is what we're going to create. We will start with a simple character model, something like this one, and bring it into Adobe Mixamo, where we will see how to add animation on it and then bring it back into Cinema 4D. We will then create a setup that will allow us to have creative control over a large amount of clones using the MoGraph toolset. Now this tutorial will be a bit long because there are a lot of things to explain, but I will put timestamps for each different step at the video description. You will find it down below, so feel free to jump ahead. Otherwise, you can make yourself a nice cup of coffee, lay back and enjoy the tutorial. So let's jump into Cinema and get started. So now in Cinema 4D, the first thing I'm going to do is bring a model from the content browser, Prime library. I'm using the human male model and I'm going to make a few adjustments. Turn off the subdivision surface. Then it has mouth interior objects, which we don't really need. So let's delete all of these. And it also has eye reflection objects, which we don't need for this project. So we end up with these three objects, which I'm going to connect and delete, and then delete the rest of the objects. Now, if we look at from the side view, we see there is one problem. The model is hovering. So I'm going to select it and disable the Z-axis here, bring it down to the floor, and then re-enable the Z-axis by pressing Z. Then the model is ready to save and export. So let's export it to OBJ format in order to bring it to Adobe Mixamo. I'm going to disable the materials. I just need the UVs. So now if we go to Mixamo, I've already brought it here, but I'm going to re-upload it to show the whole procedure. So drag and drop your OBJ file. It's going to start uploading. Now to use Mixamo with your own models, you don't need to have a Creative Cloud subscription just yet. So this is a really handy service. So we see that it recognized the model, and all we need to do is adjust these 8 markers to do the auto rigging. So let's just adjust them to the corresponding place. If you are unsure, you can see the template here where you need to place the markers. And if your model is not perfectly symmetrical, you can disable the symmetry and re-enable it whenever you want. Depending if you want full articulation on the fingers, you can choose how many joints you want on the skeleton. I'm just going to stick with a standard skeleton, and it's going to take a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, that gives us just enough time to go back and make the character a bit more presentable. I find this texture a bit disturbing, so let's use a solid material instead. I'm going to go with a classic Pinkman look, which arguably it's even more disturbing, but I'm gonna stick with my guns and save this. So let's go back. It's still doing the process, but it's all automatic, so if you want you can take a small break. We see it's already done and the results are actually pretty good. So click next, proceed with this character, yes. Okay, so now you can start adding animations. I'm gonna go with a walk animation, so just filter for walk, and then you can see some nice walk animations here. So I like this one, it's pretty confident. Let's just click in place because I would like to control the position separately and download this character. I'm gonna keep FBX and 30 frames per second. So just save it into your projects folder, and then it's ready to load into Cinema. Let's just bring our folder. And then we have our animation with a nice, which is looping nicely. And it has a T-pose and everything. But if we select the mesh, we can see the axis is at the bottom. Well, if we go to our initial file, we see the axis is at the center. So Mixamo actually changed the axis here. Just gonna copy and paste the model so I can take all these materials and bring it to the animated version. And I'm gonna save this as a C4D file. Okay, So let's move on to bring this into MoGraph. Let's make a cloner and bring our character as a child. And then we see the first problem here. Even though I made 4 clones, I only see 2 of my characters, and it's offsetted with a skeleton. That happens, of course, because MoGraph cloner is treating its parent, its top hierarchy child, as a different clone ID. So it thinks that the skeleton is a different clone than the mesh. Of course, this is not the case, and it's easily fixed if I group this with the skeleton under one null, and I will name the null accordingly, and then bring the null as a child of the cloner. Okay, so that problem is fixed. Let's arrange it a bit different. And I'm gonna clean it up a bit, so hide the skeleton, and I'm gonna hide this annoying null dot as well. So let's select it and set it to none. Then we have problem number 2, the animation is not playing. This happens because when you bring an FBX file, the skin is set to only include one specific object of the scene. Now, these objects are generated by the cloner, they don't exist in your object manager, so this is not going to work. This happens because of the way that Cinema works with deformers as children to make sure that it only deforms the intended mesh. Just delete this and set it to exclude, so it will deform its parent procedurally, and then the animation works. Okay, so now you have to choose what you want to do with the animation. Do you want to just offset it, or do you want to control it, retime it with effectors? If you just want to offset it, then it's not so hard actually. Let's just make a random effector here, and in the parameters tab, disable the position, and we have this time offset parameter. If I set this to something like 30, now the animation is 31 frames, so if I set it to 30, then we see that it created some offset. So only the first animation is playing, but the others are not playing yet. Then at some point another animation starts, then another animation starts. So basically it shifted the animation for each one of these clones a bit randomly, with a maximum range of plus or minus 30. That's because whatever value you put here is going to be multiplied by the strength that the effector is applying to the clones, and of course a random effector will affect a random strength value between minus and plus 100%. So whatever strength the random effector is going to apply, it will multiply by this offset. But then we have another problem that of course the animation is not playing, which is pretty disturbing. We can fix that in the cloner this time. Here you can choose if you want your animation of the children in the transform tab of the cloner. Do you want it to play once, or do you want to loop it before and after that one time of the animation? If you choose loop, then you see the animation is always playing, and I just created a random offset very easily and efficiently. Okay, so like I said, this offset is defined by the strength of the effector. Random effector applies random strength values, and if I bring this down, then the time offset is being reduced to 0 until I go to the point of 0 when there is no time offset and all of the clones are completely synchronized, as you can see here. And of course, if I increase it, then it puts a random offset to all of them. So this is an easy way to create random time offsets. Now let's take a look how to retime the animation, meaning how to make it play slower or faster. So delete the random effector, and I'm going to make a plain effector instead. And again, I'm going to go to the time offset parameter and offset it all the way to 100% of the range of the animation, which is 31 frames. So also disable the position. So now, using the strength of this effector, I can play through the animation, and if I let it go at the specific value, it's going to continue from that value. Okay, so I don't want to play the animation because it will always play at a constant speed. I want to control it only with the strength of the effector. And now we have a lot of control over the strength of the effector in Cinema 4D release 20, because of the new fields system. It gives us a lot of powerful workflows to control how the strength is going to be applied in each one of these clones. So basically, I don't want the animation to play using the time. So I'll go to the cloner, and now I can use the fixed mode, fixed and fixed loop. Let's try the fixed first. That means that whatever adjustments I do here on the time offset, let's go back to 31. When I hit play, it's not going to play the animation. So basically, I'm playing the animation using the strength of the effector. So from 0 to 100%, it will go from 0 to 31 frames. And then it's not going to continue from here like the play mode. Okay, so basically I control 0 to 100% of the animation. What happens afterwards? Basically nothing happens afterwards because the animation doesn't loop afterwards. It doesn't have any more animation to use. So this is where the fixed loop mode comes in. If I set this to fixed loop, then I can go to more than 31 frames basically, and it's going to loop the animation in that occasion. So you can see it's going to play over and over and over forever. Now you will think, okay, but it's kind of cumbersome to control this with the strength of the effector, but this is where the fields come in. So if I use a field, first of all, like a linear field, basically from the strength 0 of the linear field until the strength, let's reduce this to just one clone, so we just see what's happening here. So from strength 0 of the linear field until strength 100 is playing exactly one loop of the animation here. So it's not just triggering the animation, but you have absolute control of which frame of the animation you're using based on what's the strength value you're giving it. If you're giving it 50% strength, it's going to be at the 50% of the animation, etc., etc. So you can use other fields. Let's delete the linear field. Let's make a time field here. So the time field gets its value from the timeline. So if the time is 0, it's going to have 0 value. If the time is 1 second, it's going to have 100% value. 2 seconds, 200% value, etc., etc. So if I hit play, we see the animation is now playing back at the normal real-time speed. You can set the animation rate from here. So basically I deconstructed the animation and I reconstructed it using the fixed mode of the cloner, effectors, and the fields, which gives me a lot of absolute control over the animation now. So I'm increasing the frame range here, and we will see that after one loop, the animation stops, even though I've set it to fixed loop here. And that's because the fields themselves are clamped from 0 to 100% by default. You can unclamp them with this switch here. So now they're playing to more than 100% strength. So you can see the animation just keeps playing. Now let's make a few more clones. That's why I deconstructed it like this, because I can have separate control now over each clone, what's going to happen. So now the animation is playing back just like the play mode, but I'm doing it with the fields. That means I can combine different fields on top of it. So let's remake a linear field and add it. Let's change the mode to add. Now it's going to add some percentage value, but we said the percentage value is equivalent to a percentage of the animation, right? So at frame 0, let's say, let's bring it to exact the clones range here to match it. So around here. So at frame 0, it's going to add 0 to the first one. It's going to add 33% to the second one, 66%, and 100% to the last one. That means it's going to add this amount of animation progress to each one of the clones, which means they still play at the same rate, but now they have a time offset, which I can have creative control over. So again, if I see it from the side, we can see they have a time offset, but they're playing at the same speed. Now, if I set this to something like multiply, then it's going to change the speed of the animation, because it multiplies, and if I multiply it by 0, for example, then this guy will have 0 speed. If I multiply by 33%, this guy will have 33% of the speed, because it's being multiplied on the values that the time field is giving. So let's hit play, and now we see the last one has 100% speed. This guy has 66%, 33%, and almost 0%. We see this guy is moving really slowly. So now, just by changing the blending mode from add to multiply, I can retime the animation instead of time offset. And of course, I can combine the two. So if I go to the start, they still start at the same state, but I can add, let's say, a random field. Let's add this and hide it. So now they're not starting anymore from the same pose. They have a random time offset, but because of the linear field, they will have also different speeds. Again, the first one will be really slow, etc., etc. So you can have complete control over the animation progress and the animation playback, when the animation will start, when the animation will end, etc., etc. So let's remove these things, and let's take a look how to make the position progress. So far we have the animation playback on a cycle, but they're not moving, right? And I want them to move. I want it to have separate control for a number of reasons. First of all, let's name our effector animation so I can easily identify it, and I'm gonna make a different effector, which I will name position. Let's disable the position Y, and we want to move them in the -Z direction, so let's move them forward like this. Okay, so if I hit play, of course, they're gonna stay there. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use the same exact follow that I'm using for the animation progress. I'm gonna use it for the position as well. So because I want to have only one place, I will make a group field out of this. And let's move it over here. And on the position, I'm gonna use this group field. So whatever I do inside this group field is gonna be propagated to both of these effectors. They both are using this group field here. So if I hit play now, we see that they're moving forward, but they're sliding a little bit. So let's fix the sliding. I'm gonna fix it by eye. Let's go to the side view. And if I play the animation, we see that the foot is sliding on the floor. I want it to be planted on the floor. So I'm gonna take a look at the tip of the toes here. I want them to stay in the same location. So I'm gonna move forward a bit. And I'm gonna go to my position here and set the right value for the position Z. So let's go back to frame 0. And let's go back to around here before the foot is lifted, basically. I want it to be at the same line in the grid. So I think it's around here. So the motion capture is not gonna be exactly perfect, but that's fine. We just want it to be approximately believable, depending on the distance that we're seeing the clones. So around now, this looks like the feet are planted on the floor. But the position is only playing one time and then it stops. That's because the field list is clamped, like we said before, so just unclamp it, and then the animation can move forward. Just like this. Now that I synchronize the position and the animation effector, I can go to my group field and add whatever field I want in order to set the speed of the animation, and it's gonna synchronize it to the position. So again, to set the speed, I'll have to multiply the field, and we can see now the faster animation will move forward faster, and the feet are planted on the floor for all of the clones. Up to this point, I haven't done something that I couldn't do if I would export the animation with the position baked in. If I would slow down the animation, of course, it would move slower at the same time. So I wanted to split it for a couple of reasons. First of all, I can do things like put them on a non-linear path, so I can move them along the spline, for example, and I can have control of the animation and the position separately. Or I can do something like scale them, and then I need to compensate for their different size using only one of these effectors. So if I would scale them, let's add another effector, and I want to disable the position, enable the scale, and let's say minus 0.5. So they're half the size right now. Okay, so if they're half the size, let's see what happens. When they're moving, let's disable the linear field here. So when they're moving, we see they're sliding. They're like skating, and that's because their stride is now too small for the amount of position that they're moving. The position doesn't care what size they are. Okay, so I need to compensate for this manually. So let's add a random effector on the scale. So the random effector is going to give some random values from 0 to 100%. Let's hide this. So it's going to scale them from 100% size to half the size. Now, if they're half the size, we see that they're sliding more, because if they're half the size, they need to move twice as fast. I'm going to compensate by going to the animation effector, and I will have to use the same field that I'm using on the scale. So this is how I'm sharing data from one effector to the other using the fields. And I will need to remap this field, but this field alone. So I will put it on a folder, and I'm going to put the range mapper modifier. So let's think what will happen. These are the values of the random field, and these are the values that I'm going to put here on this effector. This is the animation effector, and this is the scale effector. Basically, the scale effector gets the random field by itself. Animation effector, I'm going to do some remapping. Okay, so when the random field gives 100% strength, what's going to happen? 100% strength means they're going to be 100% scaled down, half the size, right? So 100% strength means they're going to be small. It means they're going to have to move twice as fast. Okay, how am I going to move this twice as fast? I'm going to have to multiply it, because we said that retiming means multiplying. So I'm going to have to multiply it by 2, right? So basically multiply it by 200%. So when the clones are small, then go twice as fast. Okay, and value of 0 means the clones are full size, which means multiply by what? Not multiply by 0, because that will mean 0 animation. It's not going to move at all. Multiply by 1, multiply by 100%. So if the clone is normal sized, then multiply by 100%. If the clone is small, then multiply by 200%. So if I hit play now, we see that the clones have a random scale, and the feet are planted on the floor. So with this workflow, we can add layers of different effects. So by now we have added different timing of the animation, different scale of the animation. We can use compensate for that using the fields, and we can add more layers of effects, such as control the color. So let's add one more effector to add a layer of color control, disable the position here, and I'm just going to use a random field, enable the colors, and I'm going to remap it to a gradient. So now I cannot see it because the clones have a material on it. I'm going to hit NQ to disable the materials, and I can see the object colors now. So I'm going to go with a gradation from a purple here to a pink color on the other side. So these are the random colors that I'm getting. And in order to see it on the material, let's hit NQ again. All I need to do is add a MoGraph color shader to my material. So go to the MoGraph, group and add the color shader. So this way you get the MoGraph colors into your material. So we added yet another layer here. So this is how you can control the animation using MoGraph. But what we've done so far is we took the object as it is with all the joints and the deformation, and we put it under a cloner. So the cloner has to deal with all these different objects and all these different keyframes that the objects actually have, which can have a heavy cost on performance. So now it's playing alright, but if I increase the clone amount, then it can quickly start becoming quite a bit slower. And usually we can fix this problem by switching to render instance or multi-instances. Now we don't see the colors here, but they are actually still there. We can see them in the render. At any time I can turn off the textures to see the colors. But the problem now is that our animation control does not exist anymore, because the way that the render instances work and how they can achieve better performances is because these objects do not really exist in the scene. So you can save a lot of memory, you can save a lot of computation time, because everything is referenced from a single source. And my only source is basically the one object that I actually have. In order for this to have different time offsets, it needs different states of the model. And I only have one state of the model. So in order to make this work with multi-instances, we're going to have to think outside of the box. We need different instances of the model to represent our animation. We're going to do a traditional animation technique. So in traditional animation, each frame is not interpolated. It's really a different drawing. But if you put them in sequence and you play back fast enough, it gives the illusion that there is an object really moving. And this is the same thing for stop motion animation. You have a specific pose, and then you take a picture, then you change the pose, even though this is a terrible pose, and you take another picture. And if you play them back in sequence, even though you just have a bunch of different photos, they're going to give the illusion that there is a character that is really moving. So we're going to have to do the same technique, but using models in order to create this illusion of movement. So in order to create new states for my character, I'm going to copy the character and bring it into a new scene where I can work more comfortably. Okay, first of all, I want to get rid of all this excessive amount of objects and try to streamline things a little bit. For that, I'm going to cache the animation. There are many ways to cache it. You can use Alembic, you can use something else. I'm going to use the character point cache tag because I found it convenient for this workflow. First of all, I'm going to disable the deformer, store the state, enable the deformer, and then I want to go to the frame range of my animation, which is 31 frames. If you don't remember it, hit Shift and F3 to bring the timeline, and by selecting the joints you can see the frame range is 0 to 31. So back to our point cache tag, we are at the frame range of the animation. We can click calculate and it bakes the animation, and this horrendous result is because the skin is enabled at the same time on top of the cache. So we disable it, test that everything is working, and then you can delete the skin object, you can delete all of these joints, and you can delete the weight tag as well. And I can also get rid of this null here, and I'm going to name the object accordingly. Alright, now if we take a look at the cache tag, it plays the animation. Let's create 300 frames again. But it only plays it once. You know, we don't have the cloner with its loop modes anymore. But the cache has integrated loop modes here. We can put something like 100, so it will continue to loop. Just keep in mind that it's going to loop forward, but it's not going to loop backwards. So if I move backwards here in time, we see nothing happens in the negative frames. We also have an offset parameter. That means I can offset the animation animation similar to the cloner, but like I said before, if we try to offset it positively, it doesn't have any animation to loop before the animation starts. So if you want to offset the animation, you should probably offset it backwards. And then we have a scale parameter here, which controls the timing of the animation. All right, so now I want to create different states of the animation. And you have to think, how many states do you want? Do you want once per frame, or do you want 2 per frame, meaning once every half a frame, or more? I'm gonna keep it simple and make 1 per different frame. So the animation is from 0 to 31. That means it's 32 frames of animation. I'm gonna make 32 copies of this model. So hit Shift and C to bring the commander, and start typing duplicate. When you find it, just hit enter. And I'm gonna make 32 copies and click new transform. I'm gonna delete the original object, and I have my 32 copies here, nicely named from 0 to 31, just like the frames. But how do I create the corresponding frame for this? If I scrub the time, we can see the animation is playing for all of these objects, but I just want a different state for each one of these objects. For this, I'm going to use a variable in the attribute manager. So I will select all the tags by selecting the first one, and then shift and click to select the last one. We can see we selected 32 elements here. And on the offset tab, I can type a number, which will put the same number to everything, but I can also type a variable. And one of the most useful variables is the num variable, which will give the index of selection to every single one of my selections. So if I hit enter, it says multiple values here. That's because every single one has a different value. It has the index of selection. So the first one will have 0, the second one will have 1, the third one will have 2, and so on and so forth. Let's check it out. 0, 1, 2, etc., etc., until it goes to 31 at the final one. So I offsetted this by 1 frame for each single one object, but I still see the same object here. That's because, like we said, there is no negative loop. So I have to play through the animation to see it. So I can either go until the end here in order for each one of these to have a different frame, or I can go back to the beginning and do the same selection again, but instead of typing num, I'm going to type minus num. So it's going to put a negative offset to each one of these clones, and immediately they have the correct value here. So I don't need all these point cache tags anymore. I can select all of them and delete them except for the first one, in case I want to reuse it later. I'm just going to disable it, so it's not going to play the animation anymore. And then I just created one different model for each frame. So let's make a cloner now. And I'm going to middle click on this to select all the hierarchy, deselect the parent, and just bring all the children under the cloner. I'm going to delete the null here. So I have all the children inside the cloner. Now let's align them horizontally and make 32 clones. So it's gonna iterate through each one of these clones. You can see, basically I see all of my animation here. All the models that I created are here, and we see them in order one by one, all my different frames. Okay, but how do I play this animation? If I go to one model, if I could exchange this one by one for each one of these frames, then it would basically animate my character, right? But how do I control which clone is being used? This is done using another parameter of the effectors. Let's make a plain effector here. So instead of using the time offset, which is irrelevant now that we don't have any keyframes, I will use this modify clone parameter. Let's try to increase this and see what happens. So if I increase this parameter, it's actually choosing a different clone from inside the cloner to show me. And basically, just by this parameter, I'm playing the animation, as you can see. But this time I'm not deforming it, I'm not using keyframes, I'm just exchanging the models. So again, these parameters are controlled by the strength of the effector here, and using the strength of the effector, I'm playing back my animation. So I'm at the same point where I was before, just with the strength of the effector, I'm playing back the animation, which means I can control it with fields again. So just by moving the field, now I control the animation on exactly the same fashion that I could control it before. But there are some more adjustments that I need to do. Let's go back to our follow, delete the linear and make the time field. Okay, so it's playing the animation, but it's only playing it once. It reaches 100%. I can unclamp it, but it still only plays one time. Of course, I don't have the loop modes of the cloner to help me now, so I have to create loop by myself. So in order to create a loop effect, basically when the strength exceeds 100%, I want it to return back to 0. And this can be done using a modifier layer, using the curve modifier. So if I create a curve, I can remap the strength along this curve, but I also have some extra controls. I can control what happens before this curve, and I can control what happens after this curve. So basically this curve is from 0 to 100% value. So after the curve, I can say loop. Again, go back to the beginning. So if I set this to loop after the curve, we can see now the animation is playing constantly and forever. So just with these adjustments, I have now reproduced the previous setup. That means that I can use multi-instances here. As you can see, the animation is still playing, and I can increase the clones, and the animation is still playing, but I can have full control over the animation. For example, I can put a linear field now, and again, multiply on top of the time field. So at the end here, it plays faster, while at the beginning it plays slower. Now, something that you will notice, if the animation plays really slow, the models are not enough. It doesn't interpolate between different models. So I can see the non-smooth motion here of the animation. So for this, you need more frames, basically. And to create more frames, you need more copies of your models. So let's see quickly how you can create more frames, and then I will leave it. So depending on your project and how much you want to slow down the animation, you can create the appropriate amount of frames. So let's go back here, let's disable our cloner, and I'm gonna delete all of these clones and enable my point cache tag. So now the animation is playing through the point cache tag. Okay, so think how many frames you want to have. If you want a model for every half a frame, for example, that means double the frame rate, right? I'm gonna set the scale to 50%. So now the animation is playing at a slow motion. Basically, the point cache tag is interpolating the motion for us. And I'm gonna use that. Or I can go even slower, but I'm gonna stay at that. So double the frame rate means double the amount of models. Instead of 32 models, I'm gonna make 64 models. So I slowed down the animation through the tag. I'm gonna hit Shift and C to run the duplicate command again and make 64 models here, make a new transform, delete the original, get all these copies. You see, I brought all the children here, bring them inside the cloner, and then I'm gonna delete this null here. So I created these objects. Now I forgot to rename the object, so now I have this annoying timing, but I can fix that. Basically, I want to remove this dot null dot part. I'm just going to use the naming tool. Maybe it's an opportunity to show this as well. And I want to replace dot null dot with nothing. Basically, just hit replace and it's going to fix it for you. And I'm going to undo this because I want this, I want one dot at least. So I'm going to replace it with a single dot here. So as you can see, I can fix the naming. All right, just like before, select all the tags here and type -num. So it creates a different state for each one of the models. And then I'm gonna delete all of these tags and I'm just gonna disable the first one. Okay, so if I enable everything, everything will work as before, but now I have more in between frames to work with. I still use multi-instances here, and now we can see the animation is a bit smoother. Again, it's not enough frame rate for such a slow motion, but it is enough frame rate for this amount of slow motion, for example. Okay, so this is how you turn this to multi-instances. And that means that I can clone this to quite high amounts without having a lot of overhead. So let's set this to per step, and I'm just gonna create an army of clones here. And you can see I can create a lot of clones and I can retain a good viewport performance here. Alternatively, if I hit play now for all of these clones, especially because I have a lot of models to show, it's going to be somewhat slower, but at any time you can change the visibility mode to something like bounding box, and then you can make it fast again, which allows you to have a more comfortable creative control over the animation offset. So I can clearly see how the linear effector is affecting the animation here at very interactive speeds, and whenever I want to hit render, it's not going to have much of a problem to render these multi-instances. So this is how I can turn the setup I had before into this new one. So let's go back and convert our previous setup. Actually, I'm gonna save this and I'm gonna copy all of these clones into the other scene. So I copy the cloner, I'm gonna hit V to go to the other project, and I'm gonna delete this cloner and paste the new one. All right, so I'm gonna bring our animation effector, position effector, our scale effector here. So let's name it, and our color effector. And then we have our clones in multi-instances. I have to make a couple of changes though. So here we don't want the time offset, instead we want the modify clone. On the fall off tab, well, on the group field actually, let's go here to our group field. We want a rate of 31 because this is the actual frames of our animation. And if I go to my animation effector here, I just need a curve modifier on the very top with a loop setting. So that's about it. Now if I hit play, let's show the objects and just make a bit fewer amount. So let's set it to object. So if I hit play, okay, so the colors are not working. I'm going to disable the textures so I don't get a seizure. But we see all the animation is working while it's set at multi-instances. So all of my scale, my animation, and everything else is working just fine. Now you see everything, now all the clones, even though they have different scales, different animation speeds, they're moving at the same constant speed. But this is where you can start playing around with this. So I can go to my group field that we said is the common ground of the position and the animation speed, and I can enable another effector such as this linear field, which can set the clones to move at different speeds. Well, and all of this is working together. So the scales are working together. As a matter of fact, I'm going to disable all the frames here so I can see it moving at a better speed and set it 10 by 10 for preview purposes. So we can see all of these clones. They can move at different speeds, different scales. Everything is working together nicely. And this is where you can start art directing your setup while keeping everything procedural within MoGraph. So let's go to our final step to create something meaningful out of this. A nice workflow in MoGraph is to start from the end and build back to the beginning. So I would like to have a different distribution, not just this grid mode. So I'm going to make a MoText object. And I'm going to write the word motion, and I need a nice and thick font in order to build upon. So let's use this one in order to be able to place them on it. And I'm going to increase the height depending how much you want to make. So let's make it around here and bring the depth to 0. So if I clone now on this object, let's set this to object mode and clone on the text. We see it's working, but it's not recognizing it as a text object. So instead, I'm going to connect this object using a connect object, and I'm going to clone on the connect object. Now it sees it as a polygon object, and I can clone on the surface. First of all, let's bring them 90 degrees up so they are standing, and then I want to create much more clones, so let's make 1,000. Okay, that's great. But the problem with the random modes, of course, is there are some areas with gaps, another area everything is together. So I can use a push apart effector maybe. Let's try this. So I need maybe smaller radius to bring them a little bit apart. But now I'm losing the shape of the object. So I could use another field to delete the clones that are going outside of the object, which is not a bad idea, but instead I'm going to try something different. So let's disable the clone. I'm going to put some topology in the text, so I will clone on the points instead. Let's go to our text here, and on the caps, let's make quadrangles and regular grid. Okay, maybe this is too much, so let's increase this a bit. Okay, maybe around here is all right. And I want to displace it a little bit, but I can displace the clones instead. So let's try to see how that looks. Let's clone on the vertices. So we get a lot of clones now. Maybe I need less than this. So let's increase the width here. And I don't want to get so many on the curve here, so I'm going to change the topology of the curve as well. Let's go back to the object, and instead of an adaptive spline, I'm going to use a subdivided spline where I can put a maximum length. Maybe something like this, and a maximum angle. So I can reduce the angle. Actually, let's just use a uniform spline. I don't need to be so perfectionist here. Oops, let's decrease this. So now they're going to have a uniform spacing on the edges of the object. All right, and then I get something like this. Let's displace them a tiny bit. So let's add a random effector. So this is a random distribution, and I want to disable the position Y. Actually, it's not the position Y, it's the position Z. No, it's the position Y. That was correct. Okay, so I want to disable the position Y and just disable them a little bit on the other two so they don't look completely like a grid. Maybe 30, something like this. Okay, so that looks decent. Let's hide the mesh and see if the word is readable. Well, it's somewhat readable. If you need more, you can always come and start playing around. So I can reduce the width of the caps here to create more clones, like we said before. Okay, so that looks reasonable. And now if I hit play, these guys are gonna start moving around from this position and are gonna start scattering away, which is not a bad effect, of course. Now we see a lot of clones are facing the same direction. Well, because of a linear field here, let's disable our linear field. These clones have 0% speed and they didn't move at all. So now all of the clones are moving, but a whole lot of the clones are facing the same direction. It's very funny to see this. It's like ants that are moving. Anyway, so with our random distribution effector, this is one of my initial effectors. I need to take this at the beginning. So this happens first. This is a distribution effector, so it will happen first. And then I can rotate them. So when they're moving forward, they will start moving towards different directions. So let's rotate this. And we can see that they're splitting apart. So the more I rotate, the more random directions they're going to move towards too. So let's go all the way to 360. So now they're actually moving in different directions. They seem to be at a very random position. And if I go back, we see they're going to form the word motion, which is great. Okay, but like we said, now I have to play backwards and they're moving backwards. So I need to retime this a little bit. Okay, we have a phone call. So having reassured my mother that I'm still alive, what we want to do is to reverse the animation. Instead of starting from a strength of 0 and then using the strength to move and animate outwards, we want to start from outwards and then go back. But we have to make some adjustments. As we can see, even if I scrap the time backwards, then the animation is backwards. We need to invert that. Okay, so first of all, let's go to our group field, and I'm gonna rename this to position and animation, because this is driving my position and animation effectors. And I'm gonna delete this linear field because it's not doing anything. So we have a time field here that it has a rate of 31 frames. So at 31 frames, it gives 100% value. And I need to go to my position effector and range map it. Instead of going from 0 to whatever value the time field is giving here, we see the time field here. Instead of going from 0 to whatever value it has here, I want the inverse, to have whatever value here and then go back to 0, so they end up at their starting position. So I'm going to use a range mapper, and we have 0 to whatever. So let's find the whatever. It's 300 divided by 31, that is the time field's frame rate. And then I need to multiply this by 100 to get the percentage. So I'm getting 967. I'm going to copy this and paste this as a minimum output in order to invert the effect. So let's paste it as a minimum output from that to 0. Okay, so now we start from that position and we go back to 0. All right, so I also need to have them face the other way, 90 degrees, 180 degrees. If I do this from the effector, then it's going to rotate everything, because the position is a projection from the orientation of the clone, is in clone space, right? The the position offset that the effector gives. We can see that the transformation space is node. So I need to put the rotation after the position happens. So I'm gonna use a different effector for this. Let's make a plain effector here. Final rotation. Disable the position, disable the colors, and I just want the rotation. Let's find the correct channel here, which is the heading. So I need it 180 degrees. So now we see that the clones are moving into place from being scattered to going to their rest position, which is the one that creates this word, the word motion. Okay, and this basically is most of it. One more touch that we can do is to also give some controlled color over this. So now the color is just random, right? So let's disable this. Let's delete that. I'm gonna use something different for my coloring. So I want to bake the colors into something that has order into this final position with a color with a text, but looks random at the beginning. So it will make the whole effect even more impressive when you have the color also falling into place. So in order to have something static, I'm going to make a selection tag, a weight map tag. So let's make a MoGraph weight map. And let's enable the fields. Let's click on the tag, enable the fields, and make a linear field here. So I'm just going to make a gradient on this map. Let's select the position here, make a nice gradient, and then I'm going to remap this gradient into whatever colors I want. So I could even quantize this gradient if I wanted to, but or I could paint it by hand, you know. So let's disable the fields. I'm gonna delete this field now, I don't need it anymore, and go to my color effector. In the follow tab, I'm gonna use this tag inside the color effector. So let's deselect the tag so we see what's happening. And here, let's enable remapping. And on the color remap, let's enable a gradient color. So we can select whatever colors we want for this. Maybe I can go again to something purplish to pink. So now at the beginning, hopefully it will be scattered enough to look random. Something like this. So if I'm zoomed in, I just see some randomly placed colors. And I can make even a camera animation to go from a zoomed in level like this. Let's set this to 58 millimeters. And let's add a keyframe, and let's go near the end where everything falls into place. And actually, I'm gonna go at the very end so I can see exactly the word here. And we have this nice framing with these nice colors. And then I can put my second keyframe. I'm just gonna put it a few frames before, so at the end it's not gonna have any any movement for a few frames. So this is basically our animation, and we can see that it's performing quite nicely with the multi-instances. The less instances I see on the screen, the better, or you can switch it at any time to something else and very easily preview your animation. It even plays in real-time speed, so you get a feeling of the timing and what's happening. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and found it interesting. I did a little extra work to make a rendered example of the tutorial, but if you have any questions, please leave them at the comments down below. And if you create something that you would like to share, please send it my way. Now, until next time, take care.